You know, what really happens when you push someone past their absolute breaking point? I mean, when you strip away everything they have, and they have literally nothing left to lose. Do they just crumble? Or do they get reborn as something, well, something monstrous? That's what we're diving into today.
We're going to look at two guys from history who went through just unimaginable loss. And what came next? They unleashed some of the most horrifying campaigns of revenge the world has ever seen. So the question we're really asking is a pretty dark one. Does the monster make the tragedy, or is it the tragedy that makes the monster?
So meet our two case studies. First up, you've got Vlad Dracula, a prince, a noble from 15th century Wallachia. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have Francois Lelone, a dirt-poor indentured servant from 17th century France. I mean, they could not have come from more different worlds. But believe me, their paths ended up in the same brutal, terrifying place. All right, let's start at the beginning, the moments that kicked this all off. You know, every villain has an origin story, right? Well, for these two, their stories are written in betrayal and blood. These are the tragedies that forged them. Okay, so to get Vlad's story, you really have to picture 15th century Wallachia. It was this small region kind of stuck between two giant warring empires, the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. So Vlad's dad, the ruler, was basically walking a political tightrope every single day. But here's the thing. His most dangerous enemies weren't the armies at his borders. They were right there, inside his own court. Yeah, the local nobles, they were called the boyars, and they wanted a ruler they could control, a puppet. So they plotted to get rid of Vlad's family. They had his father, Vlad II, assassinated. But for his older brother Mirsha, they saved something truly sadistic. They blinded him with red-hot pokers, and then they buried him alive. For young Vlad Dracula, that single act of treachery planted a seed of vengeance that would just fester for years and years. Okay, now let's jump forward a couple of centuries to the sunny but absolutely brutal Caribbean. So while Vlad lost his family to betrayal from the inside, our next guy would lose his to violence from the outside. A young man named Jean-David Nau, born into poverty in France, was sold into indentured servitude. After he finally earned his freedom, he was just drifting, until he was taken in by a group of buccaneers. And for the first time in his whole life, he had a brotherhood, a family. They even gave him his new name, Francois Lalana. But that happiness, it didn't last. After getting shipwrecked on the Yucatan Peninsula, Francois and his crew were ambushed by Spanish soldiers. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. And the only way Francois survived, he smeared himself in his friends' blood and hid under a pile of their dead bodies. Can you imagine? Just lying there, listening to the soldiers leave, surrounded by the mangled remains of the only people who had ever shown him any kindness. For both of these men, these moments were it, the point of no return. What came after wasn't just sadness or grief. It was a complete psychological break. It was a vow to pay back the world's cruelty with interest. We're going to call this moment the snap. It's that psychological breaking point where a person stops being a victim and makes a conscious choice to become a villain. All that pain, all the loss, all that powerlessness, it just crystallizes into one single violent purpose: revenge. The entire psyche just rebuilds itself around this new, terrible mission. For Vlad, this snap led to a slow, burning quest for vengeance. He spent the next 8 years as a political exile, wandering, gathering allies, building an army. But it was all driven by one cold, calculated goal: take back his father's throne and make the boyars suffer for what they did to his family. Francois' snap, on the other hand, was immediate. It was like a switch just flipped in his brain. As he crawled out from under the bodies of his slaughtered crew, the man he was died. He didn't just want revenge on those specific soldiers. No, he declared war on the entire Spanish Empire. The world had shown him cruelty, and from that moment on, he would become cruelty. And this is where their stories turn into the stuff of nightmares. With their purpose set, both men launched campaigns of terror that would make their names infamous for centuries to come. So once Vlad finally got his throne back, his revenge was theatrical. It was precise. On Easter Sunday, he invited all the boyar families to a huge feast. After they'd eaten and drank, he stood up and confronted them, asking them just how many rulers they'd betrayed and outlasted. And when they started boasting about it, he sprung his trap.
His guards seized them all. The oldest boyars were dragged outside and impaled on giant wooden stakes, while their wives and children were forced into slave labor building this new castle until they dropped dead. This is how he got his famous name, Vlad the Impaler. So this table really breaks down their different brands of cruelty. Look at Vlad's side. His violence was political, right? He targeted his internal rivals, the boyars, to cement his own power and get revenge for his family. His signature move, impalement, was a public show meant to create absolute terror. Now look at Francois. He was driven by just pure, unfiltered hatred for an entire people. His cruelty was personal, it was intimate, torture, mutilation. It wasn't for political gain, it was just to spread his own terrifying legend and inflict as much suffering as possible. And if you want to know exactly what was going on in Francois's head, this quote says it all. After he captured a ship that was sent to hunt him down, he sent this message back to the governor of Cuba. See, this wasn't about treasure or territory. This was a deeply personal vendetta against every last Spaniard he could get his hands on. And just to prove he wasn't kidding, out of the 90 Spanish soldiers on that ship, Francois personally beheaded 89 of them. He spared only one man, for one reason, so he could deliver that chilling message. His cruelty was hands-on. As you've probably guessed, a life that's built on that much extreme violence, it rarely ends quietly in a warm bed. For both of these men, the brutality they lived by eventually came back for them. Francois's luck finally ran out in 1667. After being ambushed by the Spanish, again, he fled into the jungles of Panama. But there he was captured by the indigenous Kuna people. And, well, they showed him the exact same mercy he'd shown all his victims. They reportedly tore him apart, limb by limb, while he was still alive, and then roasted his remains. A fittingly gruesome end for a gruesome life. So what's the takeaway here? Whether it's impaling corrupt nobles or torturing an empire for killing your friends, the path of extreme revenge, it changes you. Vlad, by the way, also met a violent end in battle. His head was cut off and sent to the Ottoman Sultan as a trophy. Both stories show that this path almost always ends with the victim becoming the very thing they hated, a monster defined by cruelty and violence. And that brings us right back to our original question. Were Vlad and Francois just destined for this? Or were they ordinary men who were pushed so far past their limits that something inside of them just broke for good? It's a question with no easy answer, but their stories are a chilling reminder of the kind of monster that can be woken up by absolute trauma.